Rain lashed the office windows, the relentless downpour creating a symphony of chaos outside. The storm mirrored the turmoil within the office, a fitting backdrop for the night's grim business. A lone figure sat hunched over a mahogany desk, the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders. Papers were strewn across the desk, each one a testament to the battles he had fought and lost. The dim light catching the hard lines of his face, casting shadows that seemed to deepen the furrows of worry etched into his skin. His eyes, once full of ambition, now held a steely resolve. This was Adrian Stone, a man accustomed to getting what he wanted no matter the cost. His reputation as a ruthless businessman was well earned, but tonight, he was a man on the brink. Tonight he stared at a picture, a ghost from his past, Victor Delacroix. The photograph was old, frayed at the edges, but the face it captured was unmistakable. Victor's smug smile seemed to taunt him from the paper. Victor had taken everything from Adrian, his company, his reputation, his wife. The memories of those losses were like open wounds, never fully healing, always aching. Now, Victor was building an empire on Adrian's stolen dreams. The city skyline, once a symbol of his aspirations, now felt like a monument to his failures. Each lit window in the corporate buildings mocked his downfall. Adrian had tried legal avenues, but Victor was too slippery, too well connected. Lawyers, courts, and endless paperwork had only drained his resources further, leaving him with nothing but frustration. There was only one option left: permanent removal. The thought had crossed his mind before, but tonight, it solidified into a plan. Desperation had pushed him to the edge, and now he was ready to jump. He'd contacted her through a series of intermediaries, whispers in the dark web leading to a name: Serpent. The dark web was a labyrinth of shadows, but he had navigated it with a singular purpose. She was the best, efficient, and untraceable. Her reputation was as dark and elusive as the web she operated in. Serpent was a ghost, a phantom who left no trace. Their meeting was brief, businesslike. In a dimly lit room they exchanged no pleasantries, only the essentials. Time was of the essence, and both knew the gravity of the contract they were sealing. He gave her the details, the picture, the price. Every word was measured, every detail meticulously planned. This was not a task for amateurs, it required precision and cold calculation. She gave him her word. A nod, a handshake, and the deal was done. In that moment, Adrian felt a strange mix of relief and dread. The wheels were in motion, and there was no turning back. Adrian looked again at Victor's face in the picture, his eyes cold and resolute. The man who had once been his friend was now his nemesis, and Adrian was prepared to do whatever it took to reclaim his life. He owed it to himself, to his future, to see this through. The path ahead was dark and fraught with danger, but Adrian Stone was a man who thrived in the shadows. This was his final gambit, and he was all in. Serpent. Even her name sent chills down his spine. She was a phantom appearing at the edges of dimly lit bars, her voice a hushed rasp. Adrian found her unnerving yet alluringly dangerous. He knew better than to pry into her life to ask about her past. Their relationship was built on necessity, on a shared understanding of the shadows they inhabited. Their exchanges were clipped, professional. Adrian provided the information, the logistics, the timetable. She listened, her eyes sharp and calculating. There was a stillness about her, a coiled intensity that spoke of lethal capability. "It will be done," she'd said, her voice barely a whisper. And Adrian had no doubt that it would be. He had made his choice, stepped into the darkness. Now there was no turning back. Days turned into a week, each hour an agonizing crawl. Adrian waited, the anticipation a knot in his stomach. He checked the news religiously, expecting to see Victor's face plastered across the headlines, the news of his demise. Yet there was nothing. He contacted Serpent, his voice tight with suppressed anxiety. "Any news?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Soon," she replied, her voice devoid of inflection. But soon wasn't good enough. Doubt, like an insidious weed, began to take root in Adrian's mind. Was she having second thoughts? Had she taken the money and run? Or worse, had she double-crossed him? He pushed the thoughts away, clinging to the belief in her professionalism. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew with each passing hour. Adrian found himself drawn back to the bar where he'd met Serpent, a dingy place on the edge of town. The neon sign flickered, casting eerie shadows on the cracked pavement. It was a place that seemed to exist outside of time, where the past and present blurred into one. He sat in the same booth, the smell of stale beer and regret heavy in the air. The dim lighting barely illuminated the worn-out furniture, and the distant hum of an old jukebox played a melancholic tune. Adrian's mind raced with memories of his last encounter with Serpent, each one more haunting than the last. He needed to hear her voice, needed reassurance. The silence of his phone was deafening, each passing second amplifying his anxiety. He stared at the screen, willing it to light up with a message, a call, anything that would break the oppressive quiet. He was about to leave when he saw him, a man in a trench coat, his face obscured by a fedora. The stranger's entrance was almost theatrical, as if he had stepped out of a noir film. The air seemed to thicken with tension, and Adrian's instincts screamed at him to stay alert. He sat at the bar, whispering into his phone. The low murmur of his voice was barely audible, but it carried an air of urgency. Adrian strained to catch any snippet of the conversation, his curiosity piqued by the man's secretive demeanor. Adrian's gaze lingered, drawn by a strange sense of foreboding. There was something unsettling about the man, something that set off alarm bells in Adrian's mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was no coincidence. The man glanced up, his eyes meeting Adrian's for a fleeting moment. In that brief exchange, a silent message passed between them, a recognition of sorts. It was as if the man knew exactly who Adrian was and why he was there. In that instant, Adrian felt a chill run down his spine. The sensation was visceral, a primal response to the unspoken threat that hung in the air. He knew he was in the presence of someone dangerous, someone who could unravel everything. He knew that look, the cold, calculating gaze of someone accustomed to operating in the shadows. It was a look that spoke of hidden agendas and dark secrets, a look that promised trouble. Adrian's mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. The man quickly looked away, but the damage was done. The brief connection had left an indelible mark on Adrian's psyche, a warning that he couldn't ignore. He knew he had to tread carefully, that every move he made was being watched. Adrian couldn't shake the feeling that he had seen him before, that he was somehow connected to Serpent. The nagging sense of familiarity gnawed at him, each passing moment deepening his suspicion. He replayed their brief encounter in his mind, searching for clues. The seed of doubt blossomed into full-blown suspicion. Adrian's thoughts spiraled, each one more paranoid than the last. He knew he was on the brink of uncovering something significant, something that could change everything, but at what cost? The phone rang, shattering the silence of Adrian's apartment. He answered, his hand trembling slightly. "Mr. Stone?" a gruff voice said. "Detective Miller, homicide. We need you to come down to the station. It's about Victor Delacroix." Adrian's blood ran cold. Victor was dead, but how? He hadn't received confirmation from Serpent. He was about to speak when he heard a click on the line. "Hello? Hello?" Silence. Then, a soft chuckle, barely audible. Serpent's voice close to the receiver. "You should have trusted me, Adrian," she whispered, her voice laced with amusement. "Or maybe you should have looked into who you were dealing with." The line went dead. Adrian stared at the phone in his hand, his mind reeling. She had set him up. The realization hit him like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. Panic surged through Adrian, a tidal wave of fear and adrenaline. He had walked into a trap, and now the walls were closing in. The police were coming for him, and he had no doubt that Serpent had left him holding the bag. The weight of her betrayal was crushing, a suffocating blanket of disbelief and rage. He had trusted her and she had played him like a fool. He had to disappear, vanish before the police arrived. He grabbed a bag, throwing in clothes and essentials, his movements frantic, desperate. His mind raced, trying to process what had happened, searching for a way out, but there was no time to think, no time to plan. He had to run, now! The city streets were a blur of light and shadow as Adrian fled, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't go home, couldn't risk being followed. He needed to find a place to lay low, to figure out his next move. He ducked into a seedy motel, the kind that attracted people with secrets and nowhere else to go. He paid in cash, his hand shaking as he signed a fake name in the register. The room was small and smelled of mildew, but it was a sanctuary, a temporary reprieve from the chaos that had engulfed his life. He collapsed onto the bed, exhaustion finally claiming him. But even in the darkness, there was no escaping the truth. He was a hunted man, framed for a murder he hadn't committed. And the only person who could clear his name was the woman who had betrayed him. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Adrian lived in the shadows, a ghost haunting the fringes of society. He moved from town to town, always looking over his shoulder, the fear a constant companion. He had learned the hard way the price of trust, the bitter sting of betrayal. Serpent had taken everything from him, his freedom, his future, his faith in humanity. He thought about trying to find her, to make her pay for what she'd done. But he knew it was a fool's errand. She was a phantom, elusive, and deadly. He would never find her, not on his own. He was trapped in a nightmare of her making, a labyrinth with no exit. And the worst part was, he knew that even if he somehow managed to clear his name, he would never truly escape the shadows. The bar was crowded, the air thick with the smell of stale beer and desperation. The dim lighting cast long shadows, making it hard to see clearly. Conversations buzzed around, a cacophony of voices blending into a single, overwhelming noise. The smoke hung in the air like a ghost, adding to the oppressive atmosphere. Adrian sat hunched over his drink, his face hidden in the shadows. He was a man trying to disappear, to blend into the background. The weight of his past bore down on him, making each sip of his drink feel like a small escape, albeit a temporary one. He had been running for so long, but there was no outrunning his past. Every dark alley, every shadowy corner seemed to whisper his name, reminding him of the choices he had made. The streets were a maze, and he was a rat trapped within it, always searching for a way out but never finding one. He saw her reflection in the mirror behind the bar. Serpent. The name alone sent a shiver down his spine. She was a ghost from his past, a reminder of the life he had tried to leave behind. Her presence was a stark reminder that the past never truly lets go. She stood in the doorway, her eyes scanning the room, her face unreadable. She was a predator, and the bar was her hunting ground. Her gaze was sharp, missing nothing, and Adrian felt a chill as her eyes passed over him, even though she gave no sign of recognition. Their eyes met in the mirror and a cold smile played on her lips. It was a smile that held no warmth, only a promise of what was to come. It was a game to her, a twisted game of cat and mouse, and she was always the cat. She hadn't come for him, not exactly, but her presence was a message, a reminder that she was always watching, always waiting. She was a shadow that he could never escape, a constant reminder of the life he had tried to leave behind. But he knew that she knew he was there. It was a silent acknowledgement, a dance they had danced many times before. The tension in the air was palpable, a silent battle of wills playing out in the crowded bar. She was reminding him that she was always in control, that he would never be free of her. Her confidence was unshakable, her control absolute. She was the puppet master, and he was just another string in her hands. Adrian finished his drink, the ice clinking in the glass. It was a small, almost insignificant sound, but to him, it was the sound of finality. He knew that he couldn't keep running, that he had to face what was coming. He knew then that his journey was far from over. The road ahead was long and fraught with danger, but he was ready to face it. He had no other choice. It was fight or flight, and he was done running. The game had just begun, and he was playing against a master. Every step he took was a move in a deadly game of chess, and he was determined not to be a pawn. He had to be smart, to stay one step ahead, and in this game there were no winners, only survivors. The night was dark and full of terrors, but Adrian was ready. He had no way out, but he would fight to the end. The game was on, and he was in it for the long haul.